It was the beast no man could conquer, but it would be tamed by the one woman the town had already broken. In the heart of a raging blizzard, the town's strongest hunters stood defeated, their rifles useless against a wounded, terrified bear. Then, she walked right past them, Emma, the woman they all mocked for her size. As the men screamed for her to run, she stepped into the storm alone, armed with nothing but a quiet resolve. How could a gentle woman succeed where an entire hunting party had failed? Before we continue, subscribe now to keep these videos coming, because only your support makes more content like this possible. The snow fell in a silent, ceaseless judgment upon the Rocky Mountains, burying the town in a cold that went deeper than the bone. It was a cold Emma Spears knew intimately, for it lived not only in the winter air, but in the hearts of the townspeople. Her cabin, pushed to the edge of the trail like a discarded thing, was her only shield. Here, in the quiet dimness, she was not a spectacle. Here, she was just a woman, wide-hipped and heavy-framed, whose only crime was the space she occupied in the world. Down in the town, the men boasted of being strong, their voices loud and brittle in the frosted air. They spoke of taming the wild land, of breaking beasts for the corral, yet they were cowards in the face of anything they did not understand. Emma knew their kind of strength. It was a loud, hollow drum that beat away its own fear. Her own strength was a quieter thing, a deep well of patience she drew from to endure the shame they so freely gave. It was the shame of having failed to be small, to be slight, to be anything other than what she was. Her little sister Clara sat by the hearth, her sightless eyes fixed on the dancing flames she could only feel. Emma brushed Clara's hair with a gentle hand, the simple act a prayer of kindness in a world that offered none. Clara knew nothing of the scornful looks or the whispers that followed her sister like a trail of dust and pebbles. She knew only the warmth of Emma's hands, the low hum of her voice, the steadfast presence that was her entire world. This small cabin was their fortress, built not of logs and mud, but of a fierce and gentle love. The sound of laughter, sharp and cruel, sliced through the window pane. A supply wagon was passing, its driver and another man pausing on the road. "See that place?" one of them jeered, his voice loud enough to be a performance. "That's where the Spears woman hides herself away. Shame she's too fat to find a man who'd want her, or a horse strong enough to carry her." The words were stones, and they found their mark. Emma froze, the hairbrush still in her hand. Each syllable landed like a whip crack, reinforcing the wall of isolation she had built around her heart. She felt the familiar hot sting of tears, but refused to let them fall, her resolve hardening into a shield of ice to match the winter outside. The storm arrived not with a warning, but as a sudden, violent sentence. The wind, a wild thing unshackled from the peaks, tore down the trail, shrieking its fury against the logs of the small cabin. Inside, the world had shrunk to the flickering circle of firelight. Emma pulled a thick quilt around her sister's shoulders, her touch a gentle anchor against the chaos. Clara shivered, her head turning toward the rattling window. "Is it the world ending, Emma?" she whispered, her voice small against the gale. Emma drew her closer, her own large frame a bulwark of warmth and safety. "No, little bird, it's just the wind putting on a show. He's a loud one, but all he has is noise." Her voice was a low, steady hum, a kindness that wove stories of sun-drenched meadows and calm summer streams to push back the fear. She was strong in this way, able to build a sanctuary from memory and love. But the town had no such sanctuary. Down in the valley, the men who boasted of breaking the wild land now huddled by their own fires, their strength shrinking with every howl of wind. They had built a corral of order, but the wilderness outside its fence was vast and terrifying. The storm reminded them how little they had truly tamed. As Emma spoke of summer, her mind drifted back to a winter past, to the biting cold of a town social. She remembered the women, their sharp glances measuring her size, their whispers like the hiss of sleet. They had failed to see her heart, seeing only the body they deemed a shame. She remembered the men, their eyes sliding past her to land on slighter figures, searching for a woman who could be easily lifted onto a horse, whose weight wouldn't slow the ride. They had all failed her, their judgment a blizzard she had weathered alone for years. A new sound pierced the storm's roar, a frantic cry, carried on a gust of wind. It was a man on horseback, his words ripped away by the gale but his panic clear. The news spread like frostbite from door to door. A beast, a great bear driven from the high mountains by hunger and cold, had been seen near the edge of town. It was a dark, hulking shadow moving through the whiteout, a physical shape for all their formless fears. The strong men grabbed their rifles, their faces grim. They would meet this wild threat with the only kind of strength they knew, the kind that came from the barrel of a gun. The clamor of the armed men was a dull, angry thud against the storm's howl. From her window, Emma could see their lanterns bobbing like frantic fireflies in the swirling white, their shouts of grim purpose swallowed by the gale. They were marching to meet the beast, their fear worn like armor. The men who had failed to tame the wind now sought to put a bullet in it. But as she watched them, a strange stillness settled over Emma. It was not the familiar resignation of shame, but a quiet, powerful pull, a summons from the heart of the blizzard itself. She glanced at Clara, a small, peaceful mound beneath the heavy quilt, and her heart steadied. She was safe. Tucking the fabric more securely around her sister's form, Emma pulled on her own thickest coat, a garment made for endurance, not grace. She stepped out onto the trail, and the wind met her not as an enemy, but as an equal. Her heavy frame, so often a burden in the unforgiving town, was now an anchor. Each solid, deliberate step she took was a testament to a strength the men with their rifles could not comprehend. She followed the commotion to the edge of town, where the trail widened near the first stable. The hunting party huddled there, their guns held tight, their faces pale in the lantern light. They had formed a pathetic corral of men, their bravado a thin fence against the vast, wild dark. And there, 50 yards beyond them, was the beast. It was a great dark shadow against the snow, its fur matted with ice and blood. It was not the roaring monster of their fears, but a creature trembling with pain and confusion, one foreleg held limply, its eyes two frantic points of terror. The men wanted to advance, to impose their will with fire and lead, to put this wild fear back on its leash. But Emma did something else. She walked past them, leaving the circle of their nervous light and stepping into the open snow. She did not shout. She did not raise a weapon. She simply stood, a large, unmoving silhouette against the storm. The bear's head snapped toward her. It saw not another hunter, but a calm, gentle presence. It saw a woman who did not flinch, who did not aim, who did not threaten. She just was. Emma met its wild gaze, and in that instant, the world fell away. She did not see a monster. She saw a mirror. She saw the outcast, the creature judged for its size and its nature, hunted and hated for simply existing. She recognized the panicked loneliness, the deep wounding shame of being a thing the world decided it had no room for. A tremor of profound kindness went through her, a force more powerful than fear, erasing the years of scorn she had endured. The men watched in stunned silence as the woman they had mocked stood before the beast, her heart open, ready to listen. The men's shouts were sharp, useless things against the wind. "Get back, Emma! You fool woman, it'll tear you apart!" But she did not listen to them. Their noise was the same hollow drum that had beaten against her for years. Her voice was for the beast alone, a low and gentle hum that carried no command, only a kind recognition. "I see you," she murmured, the words almost stolen by the gale. "I see your fear." The great bear, whose wounded leg trembled in the deep snow, lowered its massive head. The threatening snarl subsided into a low guttural moan of pain. It watched her, its wild eyes holding not the fire of a killer, but the frantic terror of a cornered soul. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from the dust of a cruel summer. Emma, standing in the town square, the sun beating down on her wide shoulders. The whispers had been as thick as flies, circling her fat frame, judging the space she took up. The shame was a physical weight, a heavy cloak she could not shed. The men looked through her, their eyes seeking slighter women who wouldn't strain a horse, who could be easily lifted and controlled. She had failed to be small. She had failed to be what they wanted. But in that crushing isolation, a different kind of strength had taken root, a deep, quiet power to endure, to simply be. That same power now held her fast on the winter trail. The town watched from its pitiful corral of lantern light, their confusion a rising murmur. This was not how a beast was tamed. This was not the way of rein and rifle. This gentle woman was breaking all their rules, and it frightened them more than the bear itself. One of the hunters, a man named Silas, whose patience was as thin as creek ice, could bear it no longer. He raised his rifle, not at the bear, but at the sky. The shot was a whip crack that tore the fragile piece to shreds. The bear jerked back, its brief trust shattered. A roar of pure terror ripped from its throat, and its eyes blazed with renewed panic. The men flinched, readying their own weapons. But Ima did not move. She stood her ground, a bulwark against the storm and the fear. Her gaze never left the bears, a steady anchor in a world of sudden violence. She would not let their panic become hers. She would stand and listen, a silent promise that kindness was stronger than lead. The gunshot's echo was devoured by the wind, leaving a ringing silence broken only by the bear's ragged breathing. It held its wounded leg, its body a taut knot of terror, expecting the next blow. But the woman did not move. Her heavy frame was a bulwark of stillness in the swirling snow, her gaze a steady, gentle pressure. She did not seek to put reins on its wild spirit. She offered it a space to be seen. The great beast watched her, and the fire in its eyes banked low. The guttural snarl softened into a pained, exhausted moan. It was a surrender not to a threat, but to the first moment of kindness it had ever known. The men on the trail stood as if frozen to the spot, their rifles held limply at their sides. They had marched out here to prove they were strong, to tame the wild with lead and fire, but they had failed. They had only brought more fear into the storm. Now, this woman they had mocked, this fat woman they judged unfit to ride a horse, was commanding a respect their weapons could not. She was taming the beast by simply listening. A memory surfaced in Ima's mind, sharp as ice. The summer market, the air thick with the smell of hay and the heavier weight of shame. The men, turning from her to hoist slighter women into wagons, their laughter a casual cruelty. She, standing alone by the dusty corral, a monument of failure in a world that prized smallness. The memory dissolved, replaced by the quiet dimness of her cabin, by Clara's small hand tracing the lines of her face. There, her size was not a burden. It was a fortress. It was warmth. It was the only kind of strength her sister had ever needed. That same strength now held the town in a state of stunned awe. Her presence on the wild trail, once a source of their ridicule, had become a quiet spectacle of power. The space she occupied was filled not with shame, but with a courage they could not comprehend. The silence of the crowd was a hollow vessel where their judgment had once lived. Into that silence, a child's voice, clear and high, cut through the cold. "Look, Pa, the gentlewoman. She saved it." The words, a simple truth from a soul not yet taught to hate, landed in Ima's heart. They were not stones. They were seeds. A fragile warmth bloomed in her chest, a feeling so foreign she barely recognized it as hope. The town had seen the beast and the woman it had cast out, and in the heart of the storm had witnessed a miracle. The wind had fallen silent, but the cold that remained was a sharper thing, a blade of ice against the world. Ima walked back to her cabin, each step a solid, quiet claim on the trail she had always felt she did not deserve. The town was a collection of stunned shadows behind her. The men who had shouted at her to run now stood mute, their rifles lowered. Their strength had failed them, but hers had not. As she passed the huddle of hunters, Silas, the man whose gunshot had nearly destroyed everything, could not meet her gaze. He stared at his own boots, a deep and unfamiliar shame turning his face to stone. Back inside her fortress of logs, with Clara humming softly by the fire, Ima felt the change. The silence from the town was no longer a judgment. It was a question. In the forest beyond the trail, the great bear had found a sheltered hollow. He was a silent, wounded guardian, a wild beast tamed not by rein or rope, but by a moment of recognition. But as one storm settled, another gathered. For days, a new sound had been growing on the wind, a grinding, mechanical groan that had nothing to do with nature. It came from the high ridges, where greedy men had come seeking gold. Their machines tore at the sacred ground of the Ute, ripping through frozen earth and ancient pines with a brutal kind of hunger. They were trying to put the land in a corral of their own making, to break its spirit as they might break a horse. Ima listened, and her heart, which had just found a fragile peace, felt a new and painful pull. She recognized the violation. It was the same arrogance, the same refusal to listen, the same belief that anything that could not be controlled should be broken. A clash was inevitable. One afternoon, it arrived. Shouts echoed down the trail, sharp with anger. Peering through her small window, Ima saw them. 2 miners, their faces hard with greed, confronting 3 Ute scouts whose quiet dignity was a stark contrast to the miners' loud threats. The conflict was a spreading stain on the snow, a skirmish of dust and fury that brought the world's ugliest fight to the edge of her gentle sanctuary. Violence simmered in the air, a familiar poison, and Emma knew her quiet life was over. The world was asking her to be strong again. The trail that had once been a path of shame was now a path of purpose. Emma walked it with Clara's small hand held firmly in her own, the fine dust of the clearing ahead rising to meet them not with scorn, but with a quiet welcome. Before her stood the Ute elders, their faces carved with the wisdom of the mountains, their eyes holding a stillness the men of the town could never comprehend. They did not see a fat woman who had failed to find a husband or a horse strong enough to carry her. They saw a spirit who had spoken to a wild beast without a rifle. Emma's heavy frame, which had absorbed a lifetime of insults, now stood as a pillar of resolve. She had come not to speak, but to listen. Far up on the ridge, a dark shape moved through the pines. The bear. It was a silent testament to the storm, a wild thing now bound not by a corral or by reins, but by an invisible thread of kindness. It was a living symbol of a strength tamed by understanding, a perfect mirror of the woman who watched from the trail below. A memory surfaced, cold and sharp, of past winters spent utterly alone, huddled in her cabin. She remembered shielding Clara from the chill that seeped through the logs, her own body a fortress against the cold indifference of the town. That isolating shame had forged a power in her, a gentle courage born from the sacred duty of protecting the innocent. One of the Ute scouts, a young warrior whose eyes held the fire of the recent skirmish, stepped forward. He had seen the miners' arrogance, and he had seen the cowardice of the town's men before the bear. Now he saw this woman, whose only weapon was her presence. He had watched her stand before the beast, and he understood. Her strength was not in breaking things, but in mending them. "The miners do not listen to the land," he said, his voice clear in the cold air. "You listen to the Great Bear. You are a strong woman. My fight is with you." His words were a vow, forging an alliance not of weapons and war, but of a shared, gentle spirit against a world of noise. In his gaze, Emma saw not the reflection of a failure, but the recognition of a leader. A fragile hope, born in the heart of the storm, had found its roots in the frozen earth. The snow fell on the high peaks, a soft white silence that muffled the world. In a hidden pocket of pines, Emma sat with the Ute elders. The wind carried the metallic groan of the miners' machines, a sound that grated against the mountain's gentle spirit. They were men who sought to put the land itself in a corral, to break it with brute force as if it were a wild horse to be ridden into submission. Here, in the circle of quiet resolve, another kind of strength was being forged. Emma, the fat woman who had failed to fit into the town's narrow world, now sat at the heart of its most sacred fight. Clara was nestled beside her, a small figure wrapped in a thick blanket listening. Her sightless eyes were turned toward the ridge, but she saw more than any of them. "Their noise has no rhythm," she whispered, her voice a fragile thing in the vast quiet. "It is only hunger. They are like men shouting in an empty room. They cannot hear the mountain's answers." The elders nodded. It was a simple truth, a piece of wisdom that confirmed their own. Their plan was not to meet the miners' noise with more noise, but to use the mountain's own silent language against them. The young Ute warrior watched Emma, his gaze steady. He had seen how she tamed the great beast, not with a whip or a gun, but with kindness. She did not try to put reins on its wild nature. She had simply listened. Her heavy frame, once a target for the town's cruel jokes, was now a symbol of unshakable peace. Far up the trail, a dark shadow moved against the snow. The bear. It patrolled the edge of their sanctuary, a wounded but strong guardian, a testament to a power the miners would never understand. The fragile peace shattered with a deafening roar that ripped through the valley. A plume of black smoke and orange fire clawed at the sky from a lower ridge, a violent wound against the white snow. The miners had found a hidden cache of Ute supplies and had answered its existence with dynamite. The blast sent a tremor through the frozen earth, and with it came a fine, icy dust that settled on them like a shroud. The time for quiet planning was over. Emma rose to her feet, her face hardened not by anger, but by a profound and sorrowful determination. The years of enduring shame had taught her to absorb the world's cruelty. Now she would stand against it. Her long walk on the trail of loneliness had ended here, at the beginning of a war. The fine dust of the explosion settled with the snow, coating the pines in a shroud of gray. In the narrow valley, the two worlds collided. The miners, their faces smeared with soot and greed, held picks and shovels like weapons, their shouts a profane noise against the mountain's sacred quiet. Facing them, silent and resolute, stood the Ute, and at their front a large woman whose presence was a force the miners could not measure. Emma's wide-hipped silhouette stood firm against the swirling snow, a bulwark of peace. She was not there to fight, but to listen to the violence and refuse to answer it in kind. The young Ute warrior stood at her side, his knuckles white around the grip of his knife. His every instinct screamed for retribution, to meet the miner's brute force with his own, but he kept glancing at the gentle woman beside him. He saw how she stood, planted like an ancient pine, absorbing the men's rage without flinching. Her strength was a deep, still water, while theirs was a shallow, churning mud. A memory flashed in Emma's mind, hot and sharp. A summer day in town, the dust thick in the air. A group of rowdy men, careless and cruel, had shoved past her, knocking her off balance. She had fallen hard on the trail, the laughter of the crowd a shower of hot coals on her spirit. She had picked herself up alone, her dress covered in dirt, the shame a heavy cloak she was forced to wear. She had failed to be small enough to avoid them. She learned then to turn her pain inward, forging it into a quiet, unbreakable shield. That shield was now for others. A rock thrown by one of the miners flew wild and struck a small Ute boy who had strayed too close to the front. The child cried out, stumbling to the ground. Before the warrior could surge forward, Emma moved. It was not a charge, but a deliberate, unstoppable claiming of space. She knelt, gathering the crying child and turning her back to the miners. Her heavy frame, so often the source of her shame, became a living fortress, a wall of flesh and resolve against their aggression. The men paused, their crude shouts dying in their throats. They had come to break the wild spirit of the Ute, to put them in a corral of fear, but they were stopped cold by an act of simple kindness. The warrior stared, his anger dissolving into awe. He lowered his knife and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a promise, a vow. He understood now. She was the strong one. She was the one who could tame the beast of hatred without ever needing to draw a rein. The battle was not a clash of steel, but a quiet, relentless shepherd's work. The Ute moved like ghosts in the trees, their silent signals guiding the miners into dead ends, onto treacherous ice, and through snowdrifts that swallowed them to the waist. They did not attack. They merely used the mountain's own harshness as a weapon. At the center of this web of cunning was Emma. She stood on a high bluff, a large, unmoving figure directing the flow, her mind a calm and steady thing against the miners' panicked shouts. Far above, the great beast patrolled the ridge, its dark form a looming threat more potent than any rifle. The miners saw it, and their greed curdled into primal fear. They were men who had come to break the land as if it were a wild horse, but they found it would not be tamed. Down the trail, the men of the town watched, a silent congregation of failure. Silas stood among them, his hands empty, his rifle left back at his cabin. He saw how Emma commanded the chaos not with force, but with a deep and gentle wisdom. She had not put reins on the wild spirit of the mountain. She had simply listened to it. The hot shame he'd felt before the bear returned, but now it was for himself, for all of them. They had judged the woman for her size, for the space she took up, never seeing that her heart occupied a space vast enough to hold a whole mountain. The murmurs that moved through the crowd were no longer cruel. They were the sound of respect, taking root in the frozen dust of their old prejudice. The miners were finally herded into a box canyon, a natural corral of stone and ice from which there was no escape. They were exhausted, defeated by an enemy that had offered no violence, only a profound and unyielding refusal to break. Their strength had failed. The lead miner, his face a mask of dirt and fury, turned his eyes from the Ute warrior to the fat woman on the bluff. He raised a shaking fist. "This isn't over," he screamed, his voice thin and raw. "We'll be back. We'll bring enough men to tear this whole mountain down, you and your pet beast with it." The threat hung in the frigid air, a promise of more violence. But Emma did not flinch. She had weathered a lifetime of cruel words. This was just more noise. As if in answer, a roar echoed from the high ridge. It was the bear, a sound not of rage, but of triumph. It was the roar of a wild thing that had found its own kind, its own strong protector. The war was not over, but here in this frozen corral of the mountains, they had won a fragile peace. The quiet that followed the miners' retreat was deeper than the snow. It was a stillness born of awe. The men of the town, who had watched from the dusty trail, began to move not with their old brittle confidence, but with the slow, deliberate weight of men who had seen their own souls and found them wanting. They came up the mountain, not with rifles, but with lumber and tools. Their strength had failed to tame the wild beast of the storm, and it had failed to impress the mountain. Now they offered a different kind of power, the willingness to mend what had been broken. Emma watched them from the pines, Clara's hand in hers. Their footsteps are different, Clara whispered, her head tilted as if to listen to the very heart of the world. They are not trying to be loud anymore. It was true. The hollow drum of their bravado was gone, replaced by the quiet rhythm of work. The young Ute warrior came to stand beside Emma. His eyes, once hot with the fire of battle, now held a deep and steady respect. They followed a map of greed, he said, his voice low. You followed the mountain's heart. My people have been a strong beast hunted by men with reins. You have shown them that kindness is the only hand that can truly tame the wild. My spirit wishes to walk your trail. It was not a proposal of romance, but of alliance, a sacred promise to build a bridge between their worlds with the gentle mortar of understanding. A memory of shame tried to surface, the cruel laughter about a horse that could not carry her. But it was a thin ghost, unable to survive in this new air. Her heavy frame felt not like a burden, but a foundation. Then Silas, the man whose gunshot had nearly shattered the peace, walked toward her, his hat twisting in his hands. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the broken ground. The miners, they tore up this trail, something fierce, he mumbled, his voice thick with a shame he had never known before. He finally lifted his eyes, and in them, Emma saw the death of a false pride. We were wrong, Emma, all of us. We thought strength was breaking things, making them bend. We all failed to see. The gentle woman was the strongest of all. He gestured with his shovel. We'd be honored to help you fix the path, to make it right. Emma looked at this man, a stand-in for every unkind word, every scornful glance. She gave a simple, accepting nod. The first shovelful of earth he turned was not just dirt, it was an apology, a seed of hope planted in the frozen dust. The dust of the old world settled, and in its place, a new community was born. It was a place forged not in the hollow noise of men boasting of what they could break, but in the quiet courage of a woman who knew how to mend. In a clearing where the pines met the sky, Emma stood beside the young warrior, their union a ceremony that braided two cultures into a single, strong cord. The townspeople and the Ute stood together, a silent congregation that had learned to listen. The men who had once judged a woman by her fitness for a horse now saw a leader whose spirit could carry them all. Clara's laughter, a sound as pure as meltwater, echoed through the gathering. She had found a place where her gentle sister's strength was not a secret, but the law of the land. This was the legacy of the gentle woman who had faced the beast. The children of the town were now taught a different kind of lesson. They learned that a corral was just a cage, and that the only true way to understand the wild was not with reins, but with respect. The trail of shame Emma had walked for so long was now a path of honor. Far up on the ridge, the great bear remained a watchful presence, a silent guardian, a physical reminder that what the world had rejected as a monster was, in fact, an ally waiting for an act of kindness. The beast had not been tamed, it had been understood. In the first light of a new dawn, Emma stood on the high ridge, looking out over the world she had changed. The wind moved around her, a familiar friend. Her wide, heavy frame, once a silhouette of failure against the world's harsh light, was now a monument of peace against the rising sun. The shame was a ghost of a memory, a story that belonged to a different life. Below, the bear emerged from the trees. It met her gaze one last time, a long, silent acknowledgement between two strong souls who had found each other in the storm. Then, with a slow, powerful grace, the wild creature turned and wandered away, disappearing into the vast horizon, not as a beast that had been broken, but as a free spirit who had been healed. The kindness she had offered had returned to her, a quiet, enduring peace.